It's the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160 and 101.1 FM, Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank. Jim Dougherty is with us this morning, and we've got an interesting topic with Jim this morning. Good morning to you, first of all.
Yes, there's a couple different things I'd like to talk about. One is your Josh Whittleson is the winner of the Storytelling and Liars contest at this year's Northern Appalachian Folk Festival Incorporated event.
Does that make Josh the biggest liar or the best liar?
Well,
or is there a difference?
I don't know him as well as you do, and so you might be able to have a more insight than what I have.
For a newsman, that's not exactly the best sort of designation you could have.
But he dethroned a two-time reigning champ.
Yeah?
A fellow from Pittsburgh.
Now, what was his big lie? What do you recall?
I wasn't able to attend the event.
We'll grill him about that.
Right.
He'll probably lie about it.
So he won the big event of being
the
festival's winner of the Storytelling and Liars contest.
There you go.
And one other item I want to get into before we get into Jim Nance. Also, I showed my documentary on the history of mine workers in central Pennsylvania, and it's called The Struggle for an American Way of Life, Coal Miners and Operators in Pennsylvania from 1919 to 1933. And after the showing, I had maybe a dozen or so people come to me and ask if they could get a copy, and unfortunately I don't have any more copies to give out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I contacted WIUP-TV and asked if they could air it and then encourage people to not only watch it, but make copies of it themselves.
Okay.
And so it's going to be shown on WIUP-TV next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. So people should mark their calendars for that event.
There you go. Now, how did you source that? What were the sources that you used in order to build this documentary?
All kinds of print materials, archival materials. I used the IUP archive. I used the United Mine Worker Archive in Washington, D.C. I used the Penn State Archive, Princeton University's archive. I conducted oral histories. I used secondary information, and it was a 3-year project, and it was part of my doctorate dissertation at the University of Buffalo. And for that period of time, 1919 to 1933, it was very hard to get any photographs because the coal companies would not allow photographers, journalists to come in to the company towns.
Yeah.
So it was a very hard project to compile, and there wasn't any one book on it. I had to literally start from scratch.
Yeah, and the stories that you were getting obviously would not be from people who were actually in the mines in that time period, but the oral histories passed down?
I did get a few.
Oh, yeah? Did you really?
Yeah. But that oral tradition is gone.
Yeah. Now, what's the length of the film?
56 minutes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
2 parts.
So wonderful. So next Wednesday, 8 p.m.
Wednesday at 8.
Okay, that's wonderful. Okay.
And Jim Nance. About 3.5 years ago, a friend of mine, Jim Wada, came up to me and suggested that I study Jim Nance and think about getting a historical marker, for him to commemorate what he did in sports and what he did for Indiana County. And myself and a graduate student named Robert Tucker from Philadelphia did an oral history. And we interviewed a number of different people. And I have my list here. Let me get my notes. Senator White, W.H. Spatafor, Dave McNaughton, Barry McKnight, Drew Nance, May Nance. And so we compiled the oral history, we transcribed it, and we used it to compile a narrative to support this historical document and this historical monument that's going to go up in front of the courthouse.
Well, some of those fellows actually played with him on Indiana High teams.
Yes, yes. And if we were to think about the entertainment industry and those that made it on the national scene, of course, we think of Jimmy Stewart right across the street here. And we don't normally think of Jim Nance. Jim Nance was in the entertainment industry, and he was a nationally known figure. And by having a historical marker that will be placed in front of the courthouse, it will help us, elevate his story a little bit. And Jim Nance's story is very, very interesting. His father and mother were from North Carolina. They moved to Florida, and Jim's dad worked in a meat packing plant, which was very interesting, and it had a profound impact on him. After that experience, he would never eat meat. and then they migrated to West Virginia. Mr. Nance worked in the coal mines, and this was in 1931. 1931 was the worst year of the Great Depression. We can't even imagine what it was like, from today's vantage point. And after that, they moved to Ernest, and Mr. Nance got a job working for R&P at the Ernest mine. Yeah. And he worked there from 1933 to 1965 when it closed the mine. They raised 10 children in a house in Chevy Chase. And so Jim grew up in a very, very humble setting. And he, of course, went on to Indiana High School one day, apparently, when he was, I think, in junior high. The coach came up to him and said, "Do you play football?" And he said, "No." And the coach said, "You should. You're big enough to eat hay." And so that was the hook. Yeah. And he became a football player. Then he became a wrestler. Yeah. And then he was a star on the track team. He threw the shot put. He threw the distance. He ran the 100-yard dash. He was the fastest guy on the track team. For a man that stood 6'1" and weighed 220 pounds, that could run a 100-yard dash in less than 11 seconds. That's pretty profound.
Absolutely.
And so not only did he graduate from Indiana High School and had 11 Division I schools interested in him, including Penn State and Pitt, he was the president of his high school class. This is in 1961. 3 or 4 years before the Civil Rights Act. Yeah. And he decided to go to Syracuse University because of the rich African-American running back tradition. Sure. Jim Brown, Ernie Davis, Floyd Little, and Jim Nance. Jim Nance and Floyd Little were in the same backfield together. And so there are many different experiences that both of them had, especially whenever they went to play in the Sugar Bowl in 1965 in New Orleans.
Yeah, we're going to have to end our time here soon. We need to get on to the CBS Sports Minute. The marker itself, of course, he went on to the great career in the AFL.
Right. The marker is going to be unveiled November the 3rd.
Okay. In
front of the courthouse. Between 2 and 4 is the ceremony.
Okay. Between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m.?
Yeah, at 2 o'clock. So mark your calendars out there.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much.
Jim, thanks for coming in. Yep. We appreciate it. Yep. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160 and 101.1 FM. What do you want, Whittison?
All I want to do is clarify. I think I got this award for the best storyteller. That's all.
Yeah, right.
Oh, please.
Yeah, we know.
Why am I being given the third degree?
Our lying newsman will be back at the top of the hour. No, I'm just kidding. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160 and 101.1 FM. Just about 25 minutes after 8 o'clock, Chuck Clark will be telling the truth from the newsroom here at the bottom of the hour. Right now, it's time for Boomer with today's CBS Sports Minute.